prominent in our loving-kindness aspirations. According to Buddhism, compassion is an aspiration, a state of mind, wanting others to be free from suffering. It's not passive. It's not empathy alone, but rather an empathetic altruism that actively strives to free others from suffering. Genuine compassion must have both wisdom and loving-kindness. That is to say, one must understand the nature of the suffering from which we wish to free others. This is wisdom. And one must experience deep intimacy and empathy with other sentient beings. This is loving-kindness. The Dalai Lama, Essence of the Heart Sutra. We and our parents now. Our sensitive-to-criticism ego can still be aroused by our parents' words and behavior now when we're adults. We can become stuck in the patterns of childhood. We're trying to separate from them by arguing or getting angry at them when they try to control us or scold us, but winning a point is not the same as being our own person. Involvement with our parents at that competitive level simply keeps us tied to them. It's as if we're flailing in quicksand as we lash out, but all that happens is that we sink even deeper into our unresolved past. Being aroused by them now so that we feel we have to be oppositional is not age-appropriate. How do we know when we're no longer tied to them in ways that interfere with our independence? We have become truly adult when we have truly left home. That is, when our emotional business with our parents is no longer affecting us or reaching into our relationships. Our parents have a major impact on us, no matter what. The problem is that we maintain or even increase their impact on our mental states. When they reduce to adult size, we're free. We accept responsibility for our lives. Here are some of the signs that we've become fully accountable for the shape our life has taken. We have grieved for our past and let go of resentment of our parents. Our memories remain, but they do not impact us with extreme sadness, fear, or anger. We may still feel these feelings, but with less impact. They touch us, but no longer immobilize us. Our parents now have less or no power to upset our serenity by their judgments or criticism. Nor do we fight them or try to show they're wrong or inappropriate. We simply notice, say ouch, and reduce the time we spend with them until they act more respectfully toward us. We do not feel obligated to answer to them, please them by our choice of lifestyle, take sides with one of them over the other. We respect them as fellow adults, care for them as needed, but do not have to keep trying to win their approval. We look at our childhood and say, with a magnanimous shrug, well, all right then. It could have been better, but it could have been worse. I just let it be. We don't blame our parents anymore for the shape our life is in. We have moved from their fault to my responsibility. We don't put their faces on anyone. We pray for, do loving-kindness practice for, or wish the best for them now. We have forgiven them and ourselves. We are no longer trying to get anything from them. They don't owe us. Some of us experience not only neglect, but abuse and trauma. Autobiographical memories, like the ones you heard previously, find a place in the tapestry of our life story as they're resolved. Traumatic events, however, don't integrate in that way. They remain isolated, hidden in a part of the memory that does not seem to allow full integration. So when memories from this quarter arise, They feel frightening and seem incoherent, perplexing, and indomitable. Some of us who were abused in childhood, physically, emotionally, or sexually, require a specialized focus on our trauma and the post-traumatic stress reaction we may suffer from. Therapy can be of help. We may be engaging in dissociation, so we need to go very, very slowly as we tell our story. For survivors, it is so important for our words to be heard and our timing respected by therapists or friends. Our words are often discoveries, beginnings of recall, trying to put the pieces together. Therapy is about supporting us in facing the truth of the abuse as the full brunt of its reality unfolds. The compassionate companion, partner, or therapist sees each new story of abuse as unique. She stays present and gentle with us. She wants to let our story take us through our experience. Her simply giving witness to our story is an important contribution to our healing. A well-working relationship is meant to create new psychic spaciousness in which all that we are is welcomed. The welcoming happens with the 5 A's given to us over and over. In a well-working relationship, we have found the one with whom we can share the dreadful news about us. She is the one who has made room for our trauma and pain, and seeing her survive them, we do too. We are creating a new past through this new now. This is how true intimacy helps us become. Then, compassion toward us from our partner expands from an I with you into you within me. The egotistical ego cannot navigate waters as daring and nurturing as these. A partner with that kind of ego can't extend the hand so needed in the dark. With an egotist for a partner, we walk through the valley of the shadow with fear as our only companion. We can also work on ourselves to build a hale and hearty pride from the ashes of the past. Our work on ourselves is meant to identify choices and to explain causes. Compassionate presence in therapy or in relationship helps us most when it devotes 1/4 of the time to what happened and 3/4 to what to do with what happened. The damage done to us in childhood or relationships is not as important as how it still affects our choices and actions. We feel compassion for ourselves and for our family members too. We then go on to address, process, and resolve what happened to us. Then we grieve and let go of it, as in the practice steps heard previously, so it can turn into compassion and forgiveness. Such a journey of grief will show that a mourner is not a victim. In fact, grief and letting go are spiritually empowering. Because of them, we discover new ways to show our loving kindness to ourselves and everyone, with malice toward none, with charity for all, a suitable life purpose for any union-concerned human. Practice. Fulfilling our lifelong yearnings. We all carry the yearning to find fulfillment of our archaic and present needs. At the same time, we often limit ourselves in accessing truly enduring resources. For instance, we look for what is immediately gratifying, to look for what gets us through the night. Our more adult self knows how to access the nurturance that is more lasting. Our attention is then not so much on what we need now, the focus of ego-centeredness. Instead, we look into what helps us live as more awake, more wholesome, more present beings. When we come from an ego-only position, we believe that if we have a need, we have to go outside ourselves to fulfill it in people or things. We feel a hole inside ourselves when we're lonely, depressed, stressed. We've tried to fill it over and over with people, with substances, with whatever distracts or comforts us in the moment. But our need does not find fulfillment no matter what we do. Thus, our need is meant to represent something rather than to be taken literally. We can guess this to be so by three signals. The need does not go away, it comes up when we're at a low ebb, and it feels insatiable. Those three are clues that what we're seeking are enduring resources rather than stopgap measures. These resources are right here inside us, in our own self, in our past, and in our higher self. Three resources we may have been overlooking. 1. What do I need from myself that I am not giving myself? Does this represent something I am supposed to find in myself but have not yet gone there? How can I hold myself with all my fears and doubts about my ability to be of support to myself? 2. What did I need in childhood that I did not receive? Does this represent something that I still have not grieved and let go of? Am I holding on to any ill will toward my parents? Am I trying to find in people or things what they failed to give me? If they did give me what I needed, did I fail to make the transition to imitating their style of soothing and giving it to myself? How can I parent myself? The parenting might look like this. What is still left to grieve that this has reminded me of? How is what happened in the past still going on right now in my life? 3. What can I access from a higher power? For example, from a personal relationship to God, from a closeness to nature, from Buddhism, or from spiritual practices such as mindfulness and loving kindness? Am I failing to ask for or notice graces that are indeed coming my way? Have I instead made people or things my higher power? In traditional religious terms, we might ask, in the dark valley, whom or what do I go to? We recall Emily Dickinson's warning words, I have been looking oppositely for the sight of the kingdom of heaven. Number 1 points to our need for self-nurturance, self-support. We ask, how can I give this to myself right now and always? The source of this is not ego, but our higher self. We are in the present. Number 2 points to our need to grieve what we missed in our past and let go of it. Grief work, as we heard in the practice earlier in this chapter, is a form of self-parenting because we're holding our experience so it can be born and resolved. Now, we are less likely to seek from others what we missed from our parents. We ask, what am I hanging on to? How am I still trying to find what mom or dad did not give me? This will take an openness to what others can provide, an admission that our ego is not enough. We are working with the past. Number 3 points to how relating to a higher power, becoming closer to nature, engaging more seriously in spiritual practices can help. The ego believes in its own omnipotence. With spiritual consciousness, we ask, how can I open myself to the graces within and around me? We are opening to the future. Number 1 shows us how our ego became needy. Number 2 shows us how our work on ourselves, especially our unfinished emotional business from childhood, can help us now. Number 3 shows how we don't have to do all this on our own, but can rely on transcendent assistance. Indeed, number 3 shows us how to let go of ego's belief that it is all there is. We recall the words of Martin Luther King, Jr. We have cosmic companionship. Egotism is indeed based on 2 mistakes. It's all about me, and I am all there is. The first mistake is the belief that the world revolves around the ego. The second mistake is that there is no higher power than ego, either in a supportive community or in a cosmic companionship in the universe. There can be a symbolic meaning in any longing or obsession, something hanging on in our minds in a disturbing way. We find out more about what meaning it has from the 3 resources listed above. They may prove to be 3 portals to fulfillment when we walk through them in the ways outlined previously. The missing piece that we seek in people and things positively is usually one of the 5 A's: attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, allowing. Our lifelong longings are usually metaphors for one or more of the 5 A's. Here's an example of how this works. We may want to have our partner hear us, give us the A of attention. We become desperate in getting that to happen. We are continually disappointed, even when she fulfills our need, but only in a moderate way. We can use this frustration as a signal system. We are finding out about 3 unnoticed resources we can turn to. Access to them can reduce our need to get so much from any one person. We extend our practice in the same 3 areas. 1. We begin to pay attention more to our own thoughts and bodily reactions, and to act in nurturing ways toward ourselves. 2. We recall how the need to be heard was or was not fulfilled by our childhood caretakers. We appreciate what we did receive and grieve for what was missing. We let go of blame and concentrate on self-nurturance in the present. An example is in how our blame of our father might become toxic rage. We might be getting mileage out of staying in the victim mode. I get more goodies out of believing that he still owes me than out of his making up for it now. Often that's how blame keeps us stuck, creates resistance to resolution. We are endowing him with a bigness he had in our childhood, but now no longer has. He's like a retired general who wears the regalia that looks like power, but that does not really confer it. 3. We engage in spiritual practices that increase our closeness to nature and to whatever feels like the divine to us. We access the graces these practices offer and show gratitude for them. I notice that the practice of thanks does much to release us from our restlessness. This way of working with ourselves richly opens to us the world beyond ego. Here's how. We are feeling our longing to be heard, for instance, but without the grabbing and clinging that characterize our ego compulsions, the sources of our suffering. This opens us to feel the longing of all beings as an energy that has entered us, and we welcome it. This is opening to the generous love beyond ego. Indeed, whatever we feel at any deep level connects us to the human community. Our longing has an archetypal universal dimension. This is how a longing opens us spiritually. That is, acknowledges the limits of ego, and seeks what is beyond it. Egotism is antithetical to spirituality because it sees itself as the goal. It believes it has transpersonal powers, those that belong only to the higher self, our true nature. When ego serves what is transpersonal, we can feel our longing not as a deficiency, but as a way of contacting spiritual powers. Longing usually directs us to the exterior world, where we believe fulfillment can be found. But here it has led us, as the white rabbit led Alice, into the depths of ourselves, our higher self with all its gift-giving powers. What could be more spiritual than that? We keep seeing how letting go of ego is a portal into the spiritual life. That splendid possibility can make us more apt to let it go. Chapter 5. Ego and Relationships. Union implies the radical sacrifice of egoism. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, The Divine Milieu. Throughout this audiobook, we've focused often on relationship issues. Now, we can look in more detail at the association of ego and intimacy. A relationship cannot survive long when one or both partners are egotists. The commitment of an egotist is to the ego's priorities, not to the requirements of mutuality. Ego is the culprit in just about every disruption or destruction of intimacy in relationships. Letting go of ego-centeredness is the solution, the path to successful relating. In fact, letting go of ego is the first step toward finding out how to love. Nothing less is required if love is to happen than the utter undoing of egotism. An overbearing, demanding ego is deadly in a relationship because it renders us unable to love. We find it impossible to get close to someone because we're afraid of the exposure that comes with full-on intimacy. We can't be egalitarian because we have to maintain our image and continually restate our superior status. How ironic that the selfish ego fails at being truly selfish. It ruins its chances to find the only kind of happiness humans are meant for, the give-and-take life of love. It is sad that egotism is self-defeating, yet so hard to unseat. Indeed, it's hard to see, hard to work on, and hard to get over. Yet none of these three challenges can really stop us when we set our intention to steadfastly free ourselves from self-deception. Our healthy ego comprises qualities that represent our singularity. An arrogant ego uses time-worn styles of defensive or aggressive responses. So it is not really who we are, but a profile we're adopting. For instance, a man notices that having an attractive partner garners respect and envy from other men. So an egotist may use a lovely woman on his arm like a flashy bracelet. A man may want a woman only to decorate his ego. What chance is there, then, for real intimacy when one of the partners is being used as a trophy? When it comes to repairing ruptures in relationships, two abilities are necessary: to be able to apologize and to forgive. An egotist will have difficulty with both of these. She can't apologize because she believes she's never wrong. She can't forgive because she is committed to holding a grudge, a form of retaliation. Any relationship is a give and take of error and apology. This follows from the given of life that everyone makes mistakes, nothing to be surprised about. Enlightened people want to open to the truth more than to protect their infallibility. Some people's inability to apologize is due to a reason other than egotism. What looks like stubborn ego may actually be coming from a wounded place in them. They feel shame when they're wrong, or are shown to be causing hurt. Their work is more than letting go of ego. It's letting go of deeply rooted shame, a more daunting psychological task, usually requiring therapy. We can feel compassion for a person in this predicament, especially when such a person is in a relationship with us. The inflated ego puts enormous energy into saving face, into maintaining its honor. To have an ego that cannot, under any circumstances, lose face makes the vulnerability required in intimacy impossible to achieve. The word face can actually be a useful acronym to use as a reminder of the main ingredients of an oversized ego. Fear of not being liked or acknowledged as important. Arrogance, acting with a sense of superiority or smugness, insistence on being first, right, and best. Control of people and events. Entitlement to special treatment, to be honored at all times, to be exempt from the givens of life, to use others for one's own ends. An ego with a face like this denies the law of cause and effect in relationships. For instance, with this ego, we believe we can treat people any way we want and still expect them to show us respect and love. Most of us don't think the law of cause and effect applies to us. We can lay waste the environment, and it will never catch up with us. We can smoke and drink with no health consequences. These are all examples of how ego arrogance serves to buffer us from hard-hitting reality. Finally, it would indeed seem that a man or woman with a pompous ego would have a hard time finding a partner, but that is not at all the case. They appear to be good candidates for relationship. The charm of most egotists is quite appealing, and someone might easily misread their swagger as strength or as high self-esteem. This misreading explains the origin of so many doomed partnerships. Someday, we may ask ourselves this piercing question about remaining in a relationship with an egotist. How hard am I willing to work to get him to love me? In an amusing moment in the film Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler proposes marriage to Scarlett O'Hara. At one point, she says, "You're coarse, you're conceited, and I think this conversation has gone far enough." However, within about 1 minute, she has agreed to marry him. How egotism can show up in a relationship. The 5 A's are ways of showing love: attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, allowing. Intimacy happens when both partners give and receive the 5 A's. An egotist or narcissist shows up empty-handed. He cannot give these 5 A's, though he demands them from others. An egotist is disabled from showing sustained intimacy because he can neither give nor receive them fully. An egotist cannot be attentive for very long because his mind is on himself and his own needs. He cannot accept the other because he's continually judging in accord with whether the other meets his strict standards. She cannot appreciate her partner because she believes she's entitled to all he does for her. He cannot show authentic affection because that takes a deep willingness to be vulnerable, something that frightens him. She cannot allow him to pursue his own deepest needs, values, and wishes because she needs to be in full control. Yet an egotist insists a partner stay with him, though he cannot offer need fulfillment in any ongoing way, only sporadically. We might say, an egotist wants you to keep coming back for what he won't or can't give you. What's good for the goose is good for the gander is an egotistical attitude in which everything that happens between the partners has to be equal. This makes true generosity impossible. A relationship has to be flexible in that sometimes one receives more and sometimes the other receives more. Healthy adults have taken that as a given. An ego fear-based person may doubt he will get all that's coming to him, so he keeps score. Letting go of ego means allowing the scales to balance at some times and not at other times, with no reprisals or demands for equality. This is not being a doormat, only being flexible and finding an opportunity to be big-hearted. What matters when we love is the success of the relationship. That means our work is not to gratify our individual ego in a relationship, but to free ourselves from ego to gratify the relationship. Then our ego's journey is from enclosing to encircling. Possessiveness appears in what is called insane jealousy. An egotist believes that he owns the other person. This makes the A of allowing his partner to engage in friendships intolerable. An egotist easily falls prey to paranoia and may imagine that his partner's relationships are threatening to him, no matter how platonic. His position is this: you can't be an independent adult with your own circle of connections as long as you're in a relationship with me. Some relationships maintain a third as a barrier between them. This is something that stands between them so they are never simply facing one another directly. It can be a focus or an ongoing issue that never quite disappears, an affair, an issue with money, a problem child, a job or lack of one, a leftover unresolved problem from the past of the relationship or from childhood. We maintain the third partner because we're terrified of the direct one-to-one contact and communion that intimacy requires. We believe we need a shield, some form of distance in place if the relationship is to be tolerable to us. This is a subtle way that ego avoids closeness and commitment. If I don't care so much about others, their suffering or loss won't affect me so much. Behind egotism and self-centeredness, we keep seeing the fear of having to grieve. Less closeness, less commitment, less caring can insulate us from having to be crushed by a loss of someone or betrayal by someone. We might also instantly jump to retaliation. This is the ego's major way of avoiding grief about being hurt. Shakespeare expresses this in Troilus and Cressida. Hope of revenge shall hide our inward woe. Indeed, it is not going too far to say that every act of retaliation is an avoidance of grief. The wounded ego believes it's balancing the books by getting even. This seems to save ego from feeling its hurt so intensely. That is, save it from having to grieve the hurt or loss in full measure. Again and again in working with couples, I've noticed how often the actions of one partner are a way of retaliating for how the other has offended him or her. Most of the time, the retaliatory response is unconscious. We don't realize we're being vengeful. If we are called on it, we can't see it. For instance, we might engage in passive-aggressive behavior, showing anger but in a covered-up way. We do or fail to do something that inconveniences, hurts, or disappoints the other person, but it seems unintentional or unintended on our part. Examples are being late, being sarcastic, though it seems to be meant humorously, not keeping an agreement that matters to the other because we forgot. With an inflated ego, we feel the right to hit back with revenge, the ego's prized and most polished weapon. In a bond of love, there is no keeping track of wrongs and never vindictiveness because of them. We say ouch, but then we try to work things out. We want to get through the problem, not get back at one another. Truly intimate partners are under the care of one another, not at the mercy of one another. They are never punitive. We may not be capable of eliminating thoughts about revenge, but we do not have to act on them. We can begin with a commitment never again to retaliate in any way, no matter what the provocation. Retaliation is a fight response rather than a stay-and-deal response, the only response that works in truly intimate bonds. When revenge is a dish best served cold, it is still in the fight mode, though passively aggressive. Am I willing to forego the pleasure of getting even? If not, I will never be able to be truly close to anyone, let alone truly love someone. Is that precisely why I retaliate? An arrogant ego can't forget wrongs and does not get over them. Ongoing resentment is a common style of the egotist. I can't let go of how my wife had an affair. I hold it against her even though she made amends and is now committed to being with me only. I can't help but continue to obsess about what happened. I keep retaliating in small ways and great. These are the egotist's ways of saving face to make up for how he lost face because of what she did to dishonor him. Now, he finally has full permission to stay at arm's length, rather than have a life that is arm in arm. We see in all this how an egotistical reaction is a way of avoiding the direct experience of grief about an infidelity. Such grief will include sadness and anger about the break in trust, as well as fear for what the future holds. These three feelings comprise an appropriate, non-drama-drenched response to a betrayal. With ego arousal, we might dull the impact of our feelings. We rush headlong into the quicksands of indignation and retaliation. Those ego elements make any possible future reconciliation and the survival of the relationship more difficult. They also add unnecessary pain to our own experience. An inflated ego is especially visible at the end of a relationship. The egotist grieves because she has lost control more than because she's lost a partner. The closeness she called love might have been control after all. When a partner leaves us, instead of engaging with our grief and holding the partner in his, our ego wants its last chance to hurt him, that is, retaliate. Then we see the truth in this hard-hitting realization. The way it's ending is why I'm ending it. An egotist may also protect himself at the end of a relationship in which he was the unfaithful one. Then, all he says to his partner is that he regrets it's over, but not that he's sorry about breaking their trust. Defending his ego to the end is still more important than the feelings or healing of his partner. She wonders later why she was unable to notice this about him way back at the beginning of the relationship. It is normal to feel grief at an ending or during a betrayal within the relationship. We're sad and angry that she was not what we hoped she would be, or what she said she would be, what she promised she would be. Yet, with our practice of loving kindness supporting our grief, we do not blame her. We grow from the experience of letting go of illusion and unfounded expectation. Indeed, betrayal in hero stories is about the threshold to transformation. The ending of a relationship with an egotist who's been abusive or unavailable for healthy relating does not lead to grief for the loss of the partner. The loss is actually a liberation. The real loss and consequent grief is about the end of hope that it could have worked. We don't grieve the end of something toxic. We rejoice to be free of it. We grieve only the crash of the possibility that it might have changed for the better. Grieving the end of hope is more painful than grieving the end of anything. When two egotistical people are in an erotic bond, the needs of the wider world lose focus. As we let go of ego, our love matures, and we care about the happiness of all beings. Erich Fromm, in The Art of Loving, reminds us, if a person loves only one other person and is indifferent to his fellow men, his love is not love, but a symbiotic attachment or an enlarged egotism. Based on the points just listed, the question to put to a prospective partner might be, do you come into this relationship clad in ego? Are you able to manage your ego, or will you be retaliatory when offended, defensive when given feedback, attached to being right at all times, insistent on being in full control of me? How willing are you to let your ego bite the dust so our relationship can bloom? In addition, sharing this audiobook with a prospective or present partner and noticing his or her reactions shows his or her level of willingness to let go of ego attitudes. A willingness, even a strong desire to let go of egotism, is an encouraging sign of readiness for the kind of love a relationship requires. In relationships that work, we are always trying to refine our way of being with others. We're always rising above the inborn, inbred, primitive style we see around us so often. We don't let ego shape and design our relationships. Egotism is, however, mostly unchallenged by others, and since ego is closed to comment on itself anyway, it remains in place. Once we see others as helpful teachers, we're open to their feedback, and we're more likely to see how our ego handicaps our relationships. Or is ego used precisely to make sure that intimacy does not fully happen? Is that what a fear of vulnerability is really aimed at? St. John of the Cross, in A Romance on Psalm 137, wrote, I died within myself for you, and for you I revived. He meant his ego bowed out, the first I, and his true nature, the second I, emerged from its ashes. Is this what we want to have happen to us? If not, how will we ever be able to love? The venom of such looks, we fairly hope, have lost their quality, and that this day shall change all griefs and quarrels into love. Shakespeare, Henry V. Does no ego mean no me? We begin by looking again at three manifestations of ego and seeing how they might appear in relationships. A person with a healthy ego has learned to trust herself while at the same time trusting others whom the record shows can be trusted. She does not let the fear of closeness or the fear of abandonment interfere with finding and committing to relationships. Her goal is not to use a relationship to bolster her ego, but to liberate herself from egotism to build the relationship. She can accept comings and goings without a fear of abandonment. She can allow intimate connection without a fear of engulfment. With a deflated ego, we do not trust ourselves. We come across to others as passive or dependent. We look for soothing from any port in a storm. We fear abandonment, so we cling to others. We may interpret a slight distancing by others as rejection of us. We may even try to look needy and helpless to garner sympathy. Our self-esteem is so low that we sometimes act in the proverbial doormat style. This can make us prey to predators. With an inflated ego, we distrust closeness and might interpret intimacy as engulfment. We'll try to look totally self-sufficient and independent to fend off closeness. We appear invulnerable. We suppress our sense of how much we need others. We may still be in a relationship, but not with both feet. We have rigid boundaries to protect, and we disregard others' boundaries to assert our entitlement. We are the umpire and simultaneously in the dugout. An egotist comes from a wounded place, so she may deeply doubt that others will show up for her. Her pride won't allow her to show this vulnerability, so she may act as if she prefers to be independent. The ruggedly independent style of an egotist already in a relationship is a source of problems. It's important in the investigatory phase of a relationship to be open to seeing the levels of egotism and of independence that we may have to deal with in ourselves and our partner. At the same time, anyone on the human journey notices that there are times when we need to be out in the world and times when the security of a home-based relationship works best for us. How do we stay connected to someone and maintain our individual identity? Navigating the unruly waves is one of the ego's central challenges in this fragile skiff on the high seas of intimacy. The following pairs of attributes and actions illustrate conflicts that may arise as we try to reconcile those two very different orientations in ourselves with respect to relationship, our need for safety and security in a relationship, and our need to go on a personal journey. Safety and security means that we stay. Our need to go on a personal journey means that we go. Safety and security is about remaining connected. A personal journey is about being unattached. Safety and security leads us to want comfort. The personal journey leads us to risks, uncertainties, and challenges. Safety and security requires focus. The personal journey takes imagination. Safety and security happens by our fidelity to the here and now. The personal journey happens because we look for and find space rather than be engulfed or controlled by someone. Safety and security is about groundedness and having a clear path to follow. The journey is about groundlessness with no path mapped out for us. Safety and security requires reliability and trustworthiness. The journey thrives on spontaneity and risk. Safety and security wants to keep the relationship on an even keel. Our need for a personal journey allows or even provokes surprises in the relationship. Safety and security seeks cooperation. The personal journey seeks autonomy. Safety and security deals with issues, sees things through by working on them. The personal journey is content to leave things unfinished. Our need for safety and security leads to making a selfless commitment to the relationship and its agreements. Our need to go on a personal journey leads to making a commitment to ourselves to follow our bliss without hurting others. We notice in these juxtapositions that what activates and sustains commitment can put a damper on our wanderlust. This is one of many possible conflicts that arise in relationships. For instance, commitment to a partner politically means being egalitarian, but in the bedroom, our fun, erotic style might mean playfully being dominating or submissive. Likewise, a highly responsible person might be less able to relax, be spontaneous, have fun. What it takes for a relationship to maintain its erotic flair. Brain, sex, and the stages of relationship. How does the brain figure into the maintaining of eroticism? It is the ventral tegument that produces dopamine in the excitement of romance. Norepinephrine is activated in the brain during the infatuation stage. Then serotonin, a calming hormone, is less in evidence. This is why in romance we can feel a level of anxiety. Later, our Raphe nucleus, the source of serotonin, is more lively. Then we calm down and stay with one another with no anxiety. In all phases of romance and love, we may feel the effects of oxytocin, the hormone that generates closeness and relatedness. This is how the brain contributes to making authentic intimacy possible in securely attached individuals. People with ongoing abandonment and engulfment fears have less active Raphe, less serotonin, and less oxytocin at their disposal. Fears and doubts can also arise about our adequacy or worthiness. They create what feels like a hole inside, actually a lack of contact with our own energy. We may mistakenly then seek a very specific kind of sex partner who will grant us access to the missing energy. With that person, our own sense of powerlessness to get what we want fades when we see him or her as in our power. We also may have felt a sense of inadequacy about our ability to get what we want. Do I have it in me to seduce and hold on to the sex partner I really want? When we find someone who is truly wanting, needing, or responding to us with desire for us, we finally feel a sense of satisfaction. Our inner doubt is quieted for as long as the connection lasts. We feel we are adequate, satisfactory, worthy, that the hole is filled. Ego shame has taken a bow, and ego worth is all fluffed up on stage. Sex has been used as an impresario to make that happen. Musing about how relationships evolve, we can consider these possibilities. Without the egotistical dimension, it may be true that the sex drive by itself, without the relationship element, would have evolved so that we could learn to feel acceptable and adequate. This can result from successful experiments with a variety of partners. Romantic love evolved so we could, instead, focus on one special person. Intimate attachment evolved so we could feel a deep and abiding bond with that person and feel supported throughout our lifespan. For some, the bond means being able to cooperate in the important task of raising and taking care of children, if that's our calling. Being ourselves And maintaining our own identity when we're with others can be a source of conflict. We all experience it and look for ways to craft a lifestyle that honors both sides. Erotic love can help us bridge the gap because in it we're able to be ourselves and give ourselves. This is a way of letting go of ego. Romance can indeed help us let go of the poor man's version of identity, egotism. Our real identity is in the exuberant related self we contact when we feel loved and when we love. A healthy romance is how that enterprise begins. Healthy means originating in need, not neediness. Have enough, not can't get enough. Enjoying, not ashamed. Giving and receiving the 5 A's. A proud, inflated ego can seduce us in the first blush of romantic fascination. The jack-o'-lantern ego with its wry smile and its warmth so apparently enduring can fool us every time. We may think, here's someone strong who can protect me. Actually, here is someone so full of himself, there is no room for me. How can we get it that wrong? As a relationship continues, it's totally normal for high romance to fade. Then we enter a conflict stage. We find ourselves struggling with our partner. Our first response is to fluff our ego back up and assert our hegemony. Actually, conflict is where we find an opportunity to let go of ego by mutuality and cooperation. The alternative is to dig our heels in as firmly righteous, which is a way of digging a grave for our relationship. The success of a relationship depends on our committing ourselves to stating our needs rather than entrenching our opinions. Such statements are signs of egoless vulnerability because we're asking for fulfillment from another person. Being totally self-sufficient means being isolated. Admitting we have a need honors the importance of life together in order to find personal fulfillment, just what human life is all about. This is the point at which a relationship becomes a commitment, the third and highest stage after romance and conflict. That commitment is the true reconciliation of the apparent opposites, being myself and loving someone. Now, each I folds into us, and any I is we. A spiritually conscious adult has gone beyond the concern for how to safeguard her own identity and maintain a bond with a partner. She's come to realize that I am only fully myself when I am in community with all other humans and in communion with nature. My I is not fully formed without a universal we around me. I am only myself with respect to the rest of us, as a valley is a valley only by its connection to the mountains that create and cradle it. Ultimately, my so-called I is only I in all. This is unitive consciousness. Its realization is a grace, the spiritual dimension, what rounds out our relationships. When the ego is aroused in relationships. I listened to a radio broadcast exploring why people are so often inhumane. The narrator used an example based on the experience of a married male friend of his. This man's wife, in front of his friends, had made fun of what he was wearing. The husband, an hour later, told the narrator he felt humiliated and wanted to kill her. Later that day, the husband felt better, but at 3 in the morning, he arrived at the door of his friend, the narrator. He was ego-incensed again, even more intensely, and said that he had just killed her tropical fish and now wanted to kill her. He asked if he could stay the night to be sure he did not do anything so desperate. The next day, the wife told the narrator that she was so frightened she was leaving the house and going someplace where her husband would not be able to find her. The topic of the show was how the dark side can emerge in any of us. I recognized this at once to be an ego issue. This was about the dangerous consequences of a bruised, indignant ego made fun of when it loses face in front of his friends. The husband with the inflated ego could not soothe himself or self-regulate. His shame placed an embargo on kindly solutions. An ego in that enraged state is a one-trick pony. It can only retaliate. The wounded wound and keep wounding. That kind of vindictive egotism does not relent even toward people with whom there's a long-standing bond, a close, intimate liaison, a backlog of favors given to it, or even a blood relationship. Once we cross or betray the entrenched egotist, we are done for, no matter how long-standing or deep the bond. Ego severs all bonds when it's caught in its frenzy of vengeance for being affronted. We who have offended an egotist find that we've built up no credit, can expect no reprieve, no matter how much we loved, cared for, or did favors for the egotistical person. Once the ego is triggered and galvanized, it is possessed by revenge